Hi, and welcome back to U.S. History with me, Mr. Snyder, and today we are going to begin our discussion in topic 11 with hippies. So, basically, after the generation of the Great Depression and World War II, they embrace a different worldview than that of their parents, the kids of the baby boom generation. This found dramatic expression in the counterculture movement that arose in the 1960s. Members of the counterculture adopted values that ran counter to mainstream culture. So they're rebelling against long-standing customs in dress, music, and personal behavior. The counterculture both challenged the values of mainstream American society and provoked a counter-movement to reassert traditional values. So basically, the kids of the late 40s and early 50s are becoming adults in the 1960s and forming the counterculture. And the roots of the counterculture include the beatnik movement of the 1950s that rejected the emphasis on materialism and wanted people to not conform but to stand out and have their own personal experience. The civil rights movement that was going on during this time introduces forms of protest, and those forms of protest were used in the anti-Vietnam War movement. These baby boomers question boundaries and distrust people in authority. Even short hair was a signal of authority that people couldn't be trusted. Their phrase was, "Don't trust anyone over 30." They challenged restrictions on rights, dress, and hairstyles. And they're known as hippies, or people as a member of the counterculture. These people wanted to create an alternative society based on peace, love, and individual freedom. Those were their values. They experiment with new styles of dress, music, sexual relationships, and recreational drug use. Most of these people are college educated. They're middle-class white youth, and they were produced by the baby boom of the 1950s. And this huge group demographic in numbers alone provides a huge market for people who want to have them buy their stuff. So music producers and clothing designers, some of them got very rich off of the counterculture. And some sociologists said that this brought about a generation gap in American history. The silent generation is what we call the people before World War II. They lived through the Depression. They listened to the same music as their parents. They valued loyalty and authority rather than rejecting it. And they respected their military and veterans because of World War II. The boomer generation is brought up in very different circumstances. They don't have the Great Depression to deal with. They get the prosperity of the 1950s. They create their own music, which is rock and roll. They're activists for peace, so they don't respect military and they don't respect veterans, a lot of them. And they have a distrust toward anything that is tradition or authority. Their phrase, or the holy trinity, you could say, of hippies would be sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And one of the biggest bands to bring rock and roll to the United States was the Beatles. And they make an appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964. 70 million people watch this performance and become Beatlemaniacs. And this style of music, rock and roll, coming out of the late 50s with Elvis, becomes a vehicle for protest and a force for change. And other famous hippie rock and roll bands were the Grateful Dead, Jimi Hendrix, and Bob Dylan. Andy Warhol's paintings reject materialism during this time and questions traditional forms of art. Here you can see his Campbell's Soup painting, I think his most famous one. And in literature, the novels of Tom Wolfe and Hunter S. Thompson blur the lines between reporting and political activism. Hippies, they didn't all live in communes. A lot of them live in communes, communists. They are small communities where people share resources and try to live off the land. They also have different ideas about premarital sex, and they call the 1960s the sexual revolution. These people reject the traditional restrictions on sexual behavior, and they're more free in their relationships compared to what their parents had done. They turn to drugs not to just get stoned, but to expand their mind and allow them to think in different ways. One of those drugs was LSD, which is acid. And Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco becomes a hippie capital. Oh, almost 2,000 hippies descend on this capital of San Francisco. It's just the district where people lived in houses. A lot of people live in different houses. Timothy Leary was a former Harvard researcher who advocated drug use and claimed that it could free the mind. And he urged youth. His famous phrase was "tune in, turn on, and drop out of mainstream society." Also, hippies wanted to become more spiritual. So some members reject the Western religions that had been taught to them, such as Judaism and Christianity, and explore Eastern religions, such as Buddhism. Here you can see the Beatles in the upper picture. And communes provided hippies a way to live in harmony with nature, as Native Americans had done before. But it doesn't really work. It kind of dies out. The positives are that it plants the seeds for the forthcoming rights revolutions of minorities and women, and it also impacts the forthcoming environmental movement where people care about the earth. The negatives is that people did drugs too much. Drug addictions and overdose deaths rose considerably. The violence and hedonism of some of these rock and roll songs contribute to the deaths and overdoses of famous singers Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin only when they're in their 20s, losing very talented artists at a very young age. And values of the counterculture movement toward the end are becoming increasingly shallow and self-centered. At a rock and roll festival in California, the Hells Angels band stabbed a black man who was approaching the stage while the Rolling Stones were playing, and this was kind of counter to the peace and love values of the counterculture movement. And this isn't necessarily in your learning targets, but I don't think you can get through a discussion of the counterculture without a discussion of Charles Manson, who is a founder of the Manson family. He is a criminal. He obtains an apartment in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district where he becomes sort of a guru. He lives with his girlfriend and 18 other women who he calls his family, and pretty soon they move out to their own commune. And he knows one of the Beach Boys, who is Dennis Wilson, and this guy claims that the Beatles' White Album songs, if you listen to the lyrics, predict an apocalyptic race war. And this race war was called Helter Skelter, which was a title of a Beatles tune. It also quotes the book of Revelation from the New Testament in the Bible. And he has these girls brainwashed, and so he wants to bring on this race war. He starts having his brainwashed family kill whites in white districts and blame the murders on blacks. And he becomes high profile when he kills white actress Sharon Tate. And so he then goes to jail. A lot of people, it was controversial because can they even prosecute him? He didn't kill anybody. But he did get these people to kill for him, and so he is now in prison. He's the guy with the swastika on his head. Was there a picture of him? Oh, that's an old picture. He's an old man now, still alive, and I don't think you can get through the counterculture without a mention of Charles Manson. That's all for your learning targets today. Make sure you fill them out, and I will see you back here in class later on. Bye-bye.